What would you do if your husband and your lover plots to get rid of you? Hello, and welcome back to the story. Today, we will be making a recap of a 1998 movie titled A Perfect Murder. Warning, there will be some spoilers ahead, so watch at your own risk and enjoy. The story begins with a wealthy investor named Stephen, who is married to his wife Emily, who looks much younger. She pretends sweet in front of him, but when she turns back, we can see her distaste. That evening, the couple attends a museum opening and meet their rich friends. Emily secretly meets a man named David, who seems to have an affair with her. Stephen sees them and Emily introduces David to him, saying he's a painter. They talk about David's works, and Stephen says he'd love to visit his gallery sometime. Next morning, Emily attends a meeting at UN, where she works as translator for the ambassador. Meanwhile, Stephen is in his office where he finds out about the current disaster of his investments. After her work, Emily visits David in his studio. While making coffee, David seduces her, and they later make love. A while later, they get interrupted when Stephen calls. He says he would love to see David's works today, and the two looks dismayed. Later that day, David shows Stephen his studio. Stephen checks his artworks, but later on, he reveals that he knows about David's affair with his wife. David says they are in love, and Stephen gets mad, saying he is just scamming his wife. He knows that David went to prison for defrauding a widow of her life savings, and that was the second time already. David says Emily loves him, and Stephen says it wouldn't work because if she marries him, her advisor would insist a prenup, and David would not get anything. Stephen gives him a choice. He can either tell Emily the truth, or he can cash out. He offers $500,000 to kill his wife. David threatens to tell Emily about his plan and call the cops. Stephen says that he knows about his last victim, and if he turns David in, it would be his third conviction, which means 15 years in prison with no parole. Stephen tells David to come by his apartment tomorrow for the advance payment, and he leaves. Outside, Stephen takes out a letter with the picture of his wife's affair, put it in an envelope that is addressed to him, and drops it in the mailbox. The next day, David goes to Stephen's apartment while Emily is at work. Stephen tells him how he can enter their apartment without being caught. He says that he will take Emily's key, and he shows David where he would hide it. David asks why can't he just leave him his key, and Stephen says it would implicate him. Stephen says he will call the phone, and when Emily answers, that is when he will do the thing. He should make it look like he is just a burglar who got caught and accidentally kills Emily. Stephen later hands him the $100,000 advanced payment. The next evening, Emily arrives and leaves her key on the tray. Steve says he is leaving for his evening card game, and before he leaves, he takes out Emily's door key and places it under the pipe. As he goes out from the gate, he sees David, who is wearing a mask. David sneaks in and takes the key to unlock the door. Meanwhile, Stephen is playing cards with his friends. He later calls the electronic trading system in his office, and then gets a burner phone to call their home number. Emily answers it, but Stephen puts the phone in mute. That is when David attacks her. After several minutes of struggling, Emily gets hold of the meat thermometer and stabs the neck of her attacker. David drops dead, while Emily passes out. Stephen can no longer hear anything, which means Emily must have died, and he continues playing. He arrives, expecting that his wife is dead, but he is horrified when he sees her crying. Stephen panics when he hears that 911 is already coming. He jimmies the door, so it would look like the burglar has broken in the house. He takes out the key from David's jacket and puts it back on Emily's keyring. The police arrive, and Stephen leads them to the dead burglar. Detective Karaman tells Stephen that his footprints were found in the blood around the body and asks him what was he doing. Stephen says he was making sure the burglar's dead. When an officer takes off the mask, Stephen is shocked to find out he is not David, and the detective gets suspicious. As the police are taking out the body in a bag, we can see that David is just watching across the street and assumes that it was Emily. In his studio, David is very much devastated as he stares at Emily's portrait. At the station, Emily talks about the strange phone call she received before the attack. The police later identify the burglar, and they find out that he is a career criminal. Their lawyer says it is clear that what Emily did was self-defense. The next day, Stephen brings his wife to stay at her mother's house, and we can see that Emily has a very wealthy family. While she is alone in her room, Emily calls David to tell him that she is okay and that she'll be back soon as she can. David feels relieved. When Stephen goes to the room, he finds the phone next to Emily. He hits the redial button, and he finds out that her wife has called David. He tells him to meet at a ferry. The next day, the two meet and talks about what happened. David asks what would be their plan B. Stephen says it would be coincidental if there is another attempt on her life, so they should wait. At Stephen's office, we find out the worsening crisis on his investments. Emily arrives home, and when she tries to unlock the door, her key does not work. She asks the doorman for new key and asks him if her husband has changed the locks, and the doorman says no. Stephen later arrives and Emily tells him that she could not stay with him anymore. At her friend's apartment, Emily tells Raquel about her suspicions on Stephen. Raquel says that her husband cannot do that because he's rich, and her money is protected by a prenup. But then Emily admits that they didn't have a prenup. Stephen offered, but she said no. Raquel says it means if she dies, then Stephen could get her $100 million trust fund. Emily asks the ambassador's help so she can talk with the federal regulator. He tells Emily that her husband is having a huge financial problem, and he might get in trouble soon if he can't find additional cash to maintain his loan. This further strengthens Emily's suspicion on her husband's motive. She goes to Detective Karaman to tell him this, but then the detective says Stephen is no longer a suspect because they have traced the phone call he made that night to an electronic trading system. Karaman says it is a very solid alibi, but there is one thing that puzzles him. The burglar has wallets and everything, but he does not have any key, even to his apartment. At his office, Stephen receives a call from David, and he finds out that David has recorded Stephen while he was instructing him on how to kill his wife. David then says to meet him in a diner right now. The two later meet. David asks for the rest of the payment, or he will turn him in. Stephen says it will take him days, but then David gives him only 4 hours. And if he didn't show up with the cash, David will mail in his recording. Emily checks the burglar's record and finds out his address. She later goes to his apartment and uses the key on her keychain. She manages to unlock the door, which only means that the key Stephen took and put to Emily's keyring is the burglar's key to his apartment. She later confronts her husband and asks why did he put the dead man's key on her keychain. Stephen says to protect her from her lover. He shows her the letter with the pictures of her affair, which appears to be a blackmail from David. Stephen says he already paid David $100,000 to stop his evil plan on Emily, but he wants more. Emily does not believe him, but then Stephen gives her David's criminal record, which shows that he has been scamming lonely women for their money. Stephen says he has done everything in his power to protect her from this criminal. Emily is sorry for what her husband has to go through. She asks him if that's the reason why his business is in trouble. Stephen is shocked that Emily knows it, but then he says he can always make money, and what's important is her. Emily asks again why he put the burglar's key in her keychain. Stephen says he thought it was David who attacked her. Their door was not forced open, so he assumes David had taken her key. And to protect her from implication, he took the key and put it back on her keychain, and jimmied the door so it would look like a normal burglary. Emily apologizes and Stephen says he has forgiven her and they reconcile. When she says they have to tell the police, Stephen says they can't because he tampered with evidence and paid off David's blackmail. Emily asks what should they do, and Stephen says they need to disassociate themselves from David. But then she says she left her ring in his loft. Stephen says he will get it, and he leaves. Carrying the cash with him, Stephen arrives at David's studio. He is not there, but Stephen finds a note with Emily's ring, saying to meet him in the park instead. David's phone rings, and when Stephen answers it, he finds out that David has booked for a train. At the park, Stephen hands David the $400,000. He gives him the audio tape and shakes his hand. Before he leaves, Stephen tells him to take care, and David gets worried that he might have hired someone to follow him. He later arrives in his train cabin, and when someone knocks, he prepares his gun. But it turns out to be just the attendant, so he calms down. When he opens his bathroom, Stephen appears and stabs him. He takes David's gun and finds a receipt for the mailing service. He learns that David has mailed a copy of the tape to Emily. When David finally succumbs to death, Stephen rushes home. He finds the unopened mail that has the tape and hurriedly hides it in his vault, together with the gun and money. Emily arrives and Stephen gives her back the ring and invites her for dinner outside. When he goes to shower, Emily notices the paper bag where Stephen put the money, but she finds it empty, and she is puzzled. A while later, she tells Stephen that they should change the locks, because she still can't find her key. Her husband says he will call the locksmith tomorrow. Stephen then goes to the service entrance and he finds Emily's key in the pipe. He realizes that the assailant has put the key back after opening the door. Emily suddenly comes out and says she already knows everything. She figured out the combination to his vault, and she plays the audio tape that he hid. She gets mad and is about to leave when he attacks her. After several struggle, Emily takes out David's gun and shoots Stephen until he drops dead. The police later arrives, and Emily plays the audio tape where Stephen is giving David instructions on how to kill her. She explains that Stephen attacked her and she shoots him as self-defense. Detective Karaman says, "What else could you do?" and Emily feels relieved. Did you like our movie recap? Please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. To be updated for new movie recaps, hit the notification bell.